My boy.
It's finally here. The best time of the year. The spooky month. Ooh. So now it's time to celebrate the occasion with the most epic thing I could do this month. Revisit the albums of September. The second part to A Beautiful Revolution is in my view better than the first part, but in compensation the highlights aren't nowhere near as high. It makes sense that this is part 2, because this is very much in line with what we've heard before in part 1. Warm and mellow beats, accompanied by lyrical themes that revolve around bringing peace to the world. Just a less political tone to part 1, which makes this follow-up more easy listening. And Common does too a great job in the lyrics, but the beats are in average lukewarm, and the production could be better. I think the only truly memorable part of the record is the one line where he references both Nas and Kendrick Lamar. That was pretty cool. But putting that aside, it's a pretty okay album that will give you a nice time while listening, but it will also leave your head as soon as it finishes. On screen, the highlights. And now, the score of the record, 64%. I will be real with you all, I wasn't exactly a fan of this album, but my thoughts over it are still mostly positive. Why is that? It's because this album is unlike anything I've heard before. The elements of abstract hip-hop go blending in with those spoken word poetry segments that are pretty prominent all over the tracklist, and it all combines in a way that... I was going to say abrasive, but that's not the right word, it's more like out of the box. To me, it's a bit much, but as an artistic statement, this feels like one of the most daring projects of the year. The execution isn't always pleasing to me, but at least I can confirm that it's one album that certainly raised my eyebrows, and I hope I can revisit the project in the future and fully click with it. But for now, positive highlights, negatives, and a 70% superb score. We are now going from a mega daring project to another, but this time around we have a significant difference. And God forgive me, but I don't like this album at all. It personally hurts me when I don't like a project I'm looking forward to. This new Injury Reserve one in specific was especially painful because I know how contributed was the path between this one and their previous record. The glitch hop influences that were present in their previous album now take center stage, and the result is an album that to me has a soundscape that is so nebulous and turbulent that I feel disoriented, but not in a good way. I listened to this record a couple times right now, and sure, with every listen it keeps getting better, but not by a whole lot. And from the depths of my heart, I am legit very upset that I did not like this. Because the artistic value and the heavyweight lyricism are here, I'm just not connecting with it. I guess I just have to accept the fact that it's not for me. And therefore, I more than encourage you to listen to this one, because everybody else is loving it, and I'm just the odd one out of the party. So take the following with a grain of salt. Positives, negatives, score. I genuinely hope this record eventually clicks here. Hell yes. Drake is killing it in this new album, I love it so much. I'm even going to listen to it again right now. Now, in all seriousness, I think Drake perfected something with his records. The art of making music that nailed perfectly being bland and horrible at the same time. When I listen to his music, all I hear feels completely hollow, and with the personality of a piece of concrete. Except a piece of concrete doesn't make cringeworthy lines, and, you know, doesn't boast over Grumia Minor. Sure, there are some songs that I could call decent, but they aren't strong enough to sustain this record that has a that's good enough stench all over it. It's like a group of mockingbirds trying to lift Peter Griffin. It doesn't work, and the result is one of the worst listens I had all year, and a record that keeps proving one thing. The music industry is still unfair. Since shit like this will receive 100 times more streams than trap records with actual effort put into it. Shameful, it's more like certified open air sewage. Anyway, I'm getting stressed out. Negatives, 25% and next. You know, the beats here, while were certainly interesting, with samples that went from the Beatles Because to freaking Soulja Boy, they weren't exactly my cup of tea. But the lyrics on the other hand, they deserve a standing ovation. There were many records that I praised the lyrics throughout the year, but this is by far the best record I've heard all year in this department. In the beginning, not even they were clicking with me. I thought the idea of the first track was a bit corny, maybe that's why it's negative highlights. But the more I heard the project, the more I understood it, and it kept growing on me. Every single line in here feels like a punch in the gut, especially the positive highlights. Some of the saddest songs I've heard all year are present here. Too bad the beats didn't hit me in the same way. They do a bit of the service here, because if this album had great beats, it would possibly be my album of the year. But in the way it is, it's 81% superb. It's been interesting to follow Poppy's trajectory and the vast array of genres she's been diving to. In this new record of hers, I was expecting something more metalcore in the style of her amazing Eats EP that she dropped earlier this year. But it actually went on a more alternative metal side, with a dream pop touch in the last tracks. And to me, it works, but it's not as great of a listen as It was. It's a good album. The dream pop tracks, as I've mentioned, are pretty decent. The positive highlights are genuinely great tunes, and the negative ones, the worst points of the record, are just moments that leave your brain as soon as they finish. I do really enjoy how there's also some vocal inflections that remind me of Avril Lavigne, especially in the title track, which coming from me is always a good sign. I mean, almost always. I thought this was a pretty decent record, but when talking about Poppy's better music, it takes the cake. Still, if this album interests you, why not? 74%. Well, this record is certainly insane. It's constantly switching between atmospheric to apocalyptic to purely chaotic. And probably due to such distinct moments, it's a mixed bag to me. I did have a nice time with a good chunk of the tunes in here, but some of the more disorienting or dissonant points of the album felt pretty underwhelming. I did like the whole experience, but I feel like I wouldn't necessarily return to it, at least in the next months. And I kinda don't know what else to say, so 69% superb. First up, Top of the Morning, and second up, while I am glad that Baby Keem isn't being a Kendrick ripoff like he certainly could be, I also don't think this album is very good. It's more okay for that matter. There are definitely some moments where Keem shows that he has great potential to do great projects, through great flows, some cool beats, special mention to the drums on Scars, and some pretty nice bars too. These factors are pivotal for my positive highlights. But on the other hand, we also have some serious clunky moments in here. I personally wouldn't mind the beat transition that happens in the second half of almost every song, if it wasn't for the fact that the transitions felt disjointed, and that the second beat was almost always far inferior than the first one. And also, we may have some great bars in here, but there are some shit ones too. And the negative highlights, let's just state they do a disservice for this record. Well, maybe in a few years we'll see what Keem's really capable of. Not even Kendrick showed up of nowhere with Section 80. Instead, prior to that we had shit like C4. So I guess Keem is doing better than him in that aspect, maybe? Anyway, my score here is 67%. This is their best album since Smoke and Mirrors. That wasn't even a hard thing to accomplish, yet they still did it by doing the minimum necessary. The instrumentals often don't match with the lyrical themes, that sometimes are handled with no effort or care whatsoever, to the point that they just feel like stereotypes. The songs are in average very bland, and of the positive highlights, the only actually worthy song to check out is the best track, that serves as a reminder of how not bad this album would be if it was more like this. But by far, the biggest offender here is when Dan Reynolds decides to scream in the heavier tracks. His scream is abysmal. There's no defending it. He sounds like a velociraptor stepping on a Lego. Apologies to all velociraptors. And all of the tracks that use it are present in my negative highlights. I swear to God, I'm gonna have a nightmare where they release an album that he sings like this in all of the songs. But at least the album had Wrecked. Wrecked is a good song. Besides that, Pretend is still peak pandemic, and use social distancing as an excuse to stay the farthest you can from this record. 27%. My expectations weren't even low, yet this is way better than expected. This is a pretty strong pop rap album. I dare to say it's the best of the year so far. All the genre fusions are well executed, especially the gospel ones. The production is very potent, with a sort of angelical feel. The second half might lose a bit of the initial strength of the record, but it still has some really cool songs in there to put in the spotlight. And my god, this is so gay, I love it. It's cool to see Lil Nas putting all the money he gained since 2019 for extra good use. He really knows how to use it to make even more money, through not only fantastic visuals and marketing strategies, but through great music as well. I wonder where he'll go from now. Will his next album be in the same lane, or will he turn tables and make something completely different? Well, I hope so, it would be nuts. Anyway, here come the highlights to this 89% superb album. The best way to describe this album is a vibe. This record is one that you should listen less for the hooks and more to just enjoy the sparse and meditative atmosphere it sets. And I feel like it would be a great album to just lay in bed and enjoy the experience. And to some, I feel like this would give a transcendental feel, and to me, it didn't reach that, but it was close a couple times. I definitely enjoyed this record, and I have the curiosity to keep returning to this project, but I also feel like the appeal of this record sometimes doesn't fully click with me. The occasional wub wub sound to me felt kinda out of place. and the album only actually started to gain my attention after 2 or 3 tracks. Still, I recommend this project to everyone that has an interest in this ambient pop sound. It's a very well executed project in my view. Positive highlights, negative highlights, score of 77%. This new Maiden album begins nicely, but by the end of it, we're left thinking if 81 minutes of this was really necessary. There was a few golden moments in here, but it's kinda bloated, and the strength of the compositions isn't there. And plus, some tracks in here feel like the band was just recycling ideas instead of giving new ones. But it's not a bad album overall, it's just that it feels like it's more for the hardcore Maiden fans than anybody else. So pretty much what you would expect from a modern Maiden album, without much to add. 66%. Before talking about this release, I want to show you guys this. This is my list of my 10 favorite albums of 2019. And as you can see, I hold her previous record dearly. With this new album, I was expecting her to take the gold. Sadly, it didn't even make it to the podium. But at least I still really liked it. And if you need any proof, well, this is the album of the month. This is a way more experimental album than Grey Area, with Simz rapping over beats that can go from raw and tribal to triumphant and orchestral. And while this could be a recipe for disaster, Simz' splendid flow and brutal lyrics not only links it all together, but manages to complement them in a way that almost feels like she does that with no effort whatsoever. Sadly, this album did have a few weaker points, especially the negative highlights. To me, it is much weaker than everything else this album offers. At least, it's still a pretty good track, and does its part in the record. And plus, if someday someone puts together a list of essential albums of 2021, this has to make the cut. It has to be a record that will be remembered by generations to come. Positive highlights, and the score here is 92% superb. This is described as an avant-garde jazz album. Is it avant-garde? Yes, it is. But is it good? Esperanza throughout the years has shown that she really can experiment with her style, and this is one of those experiments that clearly went wrong. The songs feel disconnected, and sometimes they don't even sound like actual songs. It's more like half-constructed ideas merged in a way that sounds somewhat cohesive. But it all to me just sounds like a huge fever dream, and not a good one. Yeah, I guess it has artistic merit, and there were some songs in here that were passable, but the huge majority of the tracks were massive letdowns. And to me, this is one of the most disappointing releases of the year so far, and one of Spalding's worst albums. So highlights, both positive and negative appearing, and the score here is 45%. And now, Mr. Clinton presents the collage of the month. Seeing Bill with the Lil Nas X cover right beside him feels weird, but I'm glad to live in a timeline that this is possible to happen, even if it's in a montage.